Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Shelf Indulgence, where we talk about books, authors, and genres that don't normally get the book club treatment. This month's episode is about demons and demonic possessions. Star is going to start us off with some history about the genre.
Okay, so it was hard to find information about this genre in particular, although there's a lot of stuff out there about horror literature, and we covered some of that kind of area when we did Gothic literature. But I read somewhere that some of this thought came back from the Inquisitions in the 1200s, where the church started to take over things. And with the rise of the church, power became charges of heresy and witchcraft amongst people who they didn't think fit with what the church wanted. And in 1307, Dante published the first volume of his Divine Comedy, Inferno, and gave us a picture of what he thought Satan looked like. And that kind of stayed around until 1667, when John Milton published Paradise Lost and his version of what Satan looked like. And then we went through a lot of different eras of horror, but Mallory's going to tell us more about the more modern parts of this specific horror genre.
So the ideas behind the sort of horror subgenre of occult possession really gained a lot of traction in the very late 60s and 70s. The first book that really took off with it was, of course, Rosemary's Baby, published in 1967 by Ira Levin, which Star read. And then shortly thereafter, it was followed by The Exorcist, which also has a sequel called The Legion, and that's by William Peter Blatty. And they were very major commercial successes. And then in the late 70s and 80s, we had the works of like Clive Barker. A book that I read is by Clive Barker, and you can't see it because it's too shiny. And you also had books like The Shining, which has a little bit of a different take on possession. But heading from the 70s into the 80s, you also see it bleed into other media like horror films. And then we also had real life horror because of the Satanic Panic in the 80s, which was a supposed ritual, like mass, widespread, ritualistic abuse of children in the name of Satan. So going kind of back into the Inquisition, it really did capture, especially the later 80s, and in fact, bled into a lot of the sort of true crime cases that we still read about today, like the West Memphis 3, that was part of the Satanic Panic. So, and it's also actually a pretty relevant genre for today because, as you may have heard, QAnon is a large, widespread conspiracy theory, and that actually also centers on the idea of an elite cabal of mainly political figures who are supposedly following Satan and committing ritualistic abuse. So it's actually a pretty timely genre that we're talking about today. And I personally am a huge horror fan, so I went all out today and read a whole bunch for this for this meeting. So Marnie, what did you read?
So I'm not a huge horror fan reader. I like the movies. But this was recommended by Star, so I did read it. Head Full of Ghosts by Paul G. Tremblay, and it was published in 2015. It actually won numerous awards, including the 2015 Bram Stoker for Best Novel Award. So the reason I got intrigued by this book was because Stephen King supposedly said, "A head full of ghosts scared the living hell out of me, and I'm pretty hard to scare." I mean, I was like, all right, challenge accepted. I need to read this book. So it centers around a suburban New England family, and the main characters are really the two sisters, Marjorie and Mary Barrett. And Marjorie is Mary's older sister. She's just a normal 14-year-old girl who begins to show signs of acute schizophrenia, and she's paranoid. She doesn't trust anybody, and she thinks that everybody is watching her. And she has these violent outbursts and claims that she's hearing voices that are telling her to do bad things. And her little sister Mary, who's only 8 at the time, just is very scared of her and just wants her to feel better. And their relationship kind of changes. So around this time, their father loses his job, and the family really struggles to keep food on the table. But Mr. Barrett kind of becomes very, very religious. He's like a lapsed Catholic, and he just begins going to church all the time and obsessed with thinking that God will be their salvation. And whereas the mother thinks like doctors should really take a look at their daughters. So there's this conflict between, you know, the mother thinking they just need help. And so the father becomes so religious that he stops actively looking for work. And that makes things worse. And it only makes things worse when the hospital bills start to add up because she's hurting herself. And so they're going deeper into debt. So the doctors diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia, but the father doesn't think that that's what it is. He's convinced that she's possessed. And it doesn't help that their local priest, he comes to see them and says, yep, she's possessed. So I had a little trouble with that because it's like, whoa, what? You just looked at her and you're like, yeah, it's a demon. So they get approval for an exorcism, which I find a bit extreme. You know, like really, okay, that's all right. So we're doing this. And I just feel like it gets scarier and scarier from here on out because they decide to do an exorcism, but the father talks about this so much that they get attention from the news. And so a production company reaches out and they offer to film this. And you know, they agree because they need the money and this will help them get through it. And so it's horrifying that they decide to actually televise her daughter's psychological breakdown. So as a result, and I'm really worried that I'm gonna spoil it. I don't want to spoil it because you really have to experience the whole breakdown of this family and how this televised setting leads to what happens. So in the story, we're getting the actual story from the little sister's point of view. It's 15 years later, she's a grown woman, and she's having a book written, a tell-all book written about her family's ordeal. And so you also realize that her memory is, you can't really trust her narration because she was a child. You're not really sure what's real and what's not. And you start to question what's really actually happening here. Who do you really believe? And at one point you even wonder, is Marjorie really possessed? Is she not? And just when you think, I don't think she is, oh yeah, maybe she is. So the writer did a good job of kind of making you question what the truth is. But I don't want to spoil it, so it's so good. So let me see. I guess what I find scary, I mean, a lot of her episodes reminded me of The Exorcist, like the whole vomiting, and it's almost like she Googled, what do you do when you're possessed? And so, it's just to me like, oh yeah, she looked it up. But looking forward, you realize that the betrayal, like their parents' betrayal of having this entire thing be seen on a national scope really did have repercussions. And so it really just holds up such a horrible mirror to our society that we're complicit by enjoying and watching these, you know, these horrible episodes that this world is having. I don't want to spoil it because it really does make you question what's real and what's not. It's really good about that. So I don't really like horror books, but this was intriguing because it had a psychological, aside from the scary stuff that happened, it had a psychological component, which I rather enjoy. So that's A Head Full of Ghosts.
Okay.
I forget who's next. Sorry.
Okay, so I wanted to read the classic title. Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin is what I chose. I had never seen the movie, but it's been around so long that I think I kind of knew the gist of the plot. But so basically, Rosemary and Guy are fairly newlyweds. And they had been living in a small apartment and they were looking for something bigger because they wanted to start a family. And she was staying at home, and Guy was an actor who had a couple parts, you know, that were okay, but he was still struggling. And they find out that there is an opening in this building, and they go to see the apartment. Well, they had an apartment lined up and they had put it on deposit, but then they hear about an opening in this really old, prestigious building. And they go see the apartment, and she's like, we have to stay here. This is like so great. And she tells her husband, we're gonna make up a story. You're a good actor. Get our deposit back from the other place. We have to move in here. So they do. And Rosemary's sort of mentor, father figure in town is like, I don't know if you really want to move there. There's a lot of bad things that have happened there. Tries to say, I don't know, but she's like, no, it's great. It's great. So they move in and she starts her decorating the apartment. It's not kind of what you would imagine the 60s in New York is, you know, they go out to dinner parties and they go to restaurants, and she has melon appetizers and, you know, fancy things. And she's all about, you know, her decorating magazines and ordering silk curtains and all this fancy stuff. So most of the neighbors in the building are old and they seem nice, but they're kind of nosy a bit. And then she meets this girl downstairs in the basement while she's doing laundry, and she's like, hey, the couple that lives by you, they're so great. I was on the streets, I was hooked on drugs, and they took me off the streets and they got me sobered up, and they're helping me, you know, get back on my feet and everything. And then her and her husband go out one night. When they come back, there's all these police cars around, and they come up and they realize that this girl that she had befriended basically jumped off the roof and killed herself. So they talk about wanting to have a kid after this, and at one point I think they go to the neighbors, they have a party, she drinks or whatever, she comes home and she goes to bed, and she has this nightmare where people are carrying her, and she sees these pictures that are, you know, frightening, and she sort of dreams that she's being raped by somebody or something, and all this stuff happens. And then the next day she kind of wakes up and she's like, man, that was really crazy. I had this weird dream. And her husband's like, wow, that is crazy. They go about their business, and lo and behold, a little bit later, she is pregnant. So she makes an appointment with the doctor, goes to see him, everything is cool. They tell the neighbors, and it was like, oh, we have this really great doctor. He's prestigious. We'll get you in with him. And she's like, well, I don't even think I can, you know, get in. He's like the doctor to famous people. And they're like, no, he's a family friend. We'll get you in. And so she starts going to this other doctor. And he, you know, says, don't listen to anybody. Everybody's pregnancy is different. You know, just listen to what I tell you. And then your neighbor lady, she's going to make you these special, you know, drinks, and you're going to drink them. It's got, you know, natural vitamins because she grows all these herbs in her apartment, and it'll be fresh and it'll be great for the baby. And they give her this necklace that smells really weird. It says it's a good luck charm. And as we go through, she starts to realize something's going on, and she has all this pain, and the drinks they give her don't taste good, and the stuff in the necklace smells bad. And she starts to think that perhaps this is not good. Her mentor invited her out, was going to tell her some things, but then he mysteriously went into a coma and dies. So it just kind of follows her trying to figure out what's going on. And again, I don't want to give the ending away. This was published in 1967, and then apparently when I finished this book, I realized that 30 years later, he published a sequel, which is Son of Rosemary, which I listened to. I can see why Rosemary's Baby is very popular. I can see how it made for a really great film. Maybe it was kind of a letdown because I kind of knew the gist of the story, and if you didn't know when you were reading it, probably back in the 60s, it probably was a huge deal. Without giving too much away, the first one. So this second one starts off, not just that it's written 30 years later, but it takes place 30 years later, where Rosemary wakes up from a coma that she's been in for, 20, 30 years, and basically is trying to figure out what's going on because, she thinks she woke up after, 25 years, and she doesn't realize all this time has passed, but she's miraculously fine. She doesn't have any lasting effects. And she's trying to figure out what happened in the meantime. She's trying to find, her son, and it turns out that her son is around. He's sort of famous for this organization. Everybody has these buttons all over the world that say, "I love Andy," and he is trying to do all this stuff. I can't say too much about the sequel without giving away what happens in the first one. I would just say, though, that this one had slight ambiguous ending, which one I don't like those. But I decided no matter how you interpret the ending, it's not really very good. So I would not recommend the second one. I didn't really like it. I'm not really sure why he wrote it, if it was just to make money or they kind of pushed him into making a sequel, but yeah, I did not care for the second one. The first one obviously is a classic. I can see why. I might watch the movie at one point, but yeah, I would stop at the first one.
Okay. So I read Hyde by Kirsten White. She's typically a YA author. I think this is her first adult book. So they marketed it as like Hunger Games sort of vibe. So but the premise is like 14 contestants are dropped off in an abandoned amusement park for a game of extreme hide and seek that promises, fame and has a $50,000 prize attached to it. And the competitors range from like internet influencers looking for like content and like brand deals, and like some tech bros who are hoping to like have some face-to-face time with the executives of this like extreme sports company that's like sponsoring this event. And like there's 7 men, 7 women, but our primary like main character, her name is Mac, and she's recruited from a homeless shelter where she's been staying since she lost her job. Her family was murdered by her father. It was a really crazy backstory. And in the years since that tragedy happened, she's been trying to avoid, like forming bonds with people and like forming relationships. So she's been trying to stay to herself. But she's become a pro at like hiding from people. So she thinks that she would be able to win this, like no problem. But she does form friendships with people, and so they think that they're just playing hide and seek, like they're like people from the sports company are looking for them. They have to hide from sun up to sundown, and some crazy things start happening. Like at first they think people are just like getting out, they're getting caught, and they're disqualified, but they start finding like blood and like people's possessions, and they're like, okay, that's weird. So I mean, it's kind of a spoiler, like what we're talking about today. So there is there's like a whole ritual behind it, like why they're doing it, and the people who are in charge, like why they're doing it. But so I won't talk about that. I'll we'll leave that as a surprise. But you can kind of like, without knowing that this is about demons, or it has a demon in it. Like going into it, I didn't know that. I thought it was actually going to be like a game of hide and seek. So that was sort of like a fun surprise element to it. Yeah. In this book, it has like letters from the past. So like it really goes in depth and like explaining like the rituals and like why they're doing it. And like what future generations have to do to like keep this sort of thing going. But it was a really fun read. It's really good.
I read a couple books. The first one that I read is straightforward. It's just about a demon. You would recognize him if you ever saw the movie Hellraiser. It's Pinhead from Hellraiser. This is, I think it was written in 2015. It's The Scarlet Gospels by Clive Barker. And it is the sequel to the novella called The Hellbound Heart, which is what the movie Hellraiser was based on. So the gist of it basically is that there's interdimensional beings who do explicitly turn out to be demons in this book, who are summoned by a puzzle box, and they're called the Cenobites. And essentially they, whoever summons them does so with the promise that they will experience both pleasure and pain beyond their wildest imagining. And the idea is that the Cenobites blur the line between those two things. But eventually the people who do summon them either die or get dragged to hell. And so The Hellbound Heart was written in 1986. The Hellraiser movie is one of my favorite horror movies. So I decided to go ahead and break my rule and pick up a sequel. This was written in, I think I said already, 2015. So it is like the Rosemary's Baby, where he waited forever to make the sequel. And after reading it, I was kind of like, that was pretty good, but I don't think it was necessary. Essentially, it centers on Pinhead, who is called the Hell Priest here, who is doing something in hell. And it turns out he's actually trying to overthrow Satan. And Clive Barker actually wrote in another character from a separate series. That character's name is Harry D'Amour. So he's basically creating, because Clive Barker is like a huge colossus in the horror genre. So he's explicitly linking multiple theories here to kind of create this mythos. It was really good. Lucifer actually makes an appearance in it. But again, I don't think it was all that necessary. He kind of wrote it as a reaction to the popularity of the character of Pinhead. And I will say it is not for the faint of heart. It is extremely gruesome, especially the beginning sequence. There is lots of like very explicit gore. So I wanted to switch gears and find a different book that went and actually wasn't just about a demon, but about demonic possession. So after reading that, as a palate cleanser, I guess, I read Come Closer by Sarah Graham. This was actually older, but for some reason it gained traction recently among book reviewers. And I found it on, I think it was a Book Riot list. It's published in 2003, so it's almost 20 years old, but it's been reissued a couple of times. And this one I really liked. It's very short. You can read it in one sitting, which I did in about probably less than 2 hours. And it's straightforward. You know, the main character, Amanda, it's told in the first person. She feels something is wrong. And she starts fighting with her perfect husband. And she starts doing stuff that's really out of character. So the opening scene is her boss calling her into his office to say, what is this? She's an architect. And she thinks it's a proposal for a home, but it's just an expletive-laden diatribe against her boss. And so she passes it off as, oh, somebody's playing a prank because they don't like me. It's professional rivalry. But then she, over the next, and the passage of time is kind of hard to follow in this book. It's kind of vague. At first it seems like years, but then it turns out to only be months. So you're kind of disoriented reading it, which I actually really liked because it sort of mirrors Amanda, the main character's psychological like downfall, basically. So she's having dreams about what we know as readers is a demon who is seducing her basically on the shores of an ocean of blood. So it's like very much relying on the imagery. And this demon is called Nama. But Amanda just passes it off as a weird reappearance of her imaginary friend from childhood. And but then things start to take a darker turn. She starts smoking again, which is totally out of character. She burns her husband with a cigarette, and she has no clue why she's doing it. And it just gets progressively worse and worse from there. And she does actually find out. She keeps taking a quiz, and I actually thought it was kind of interesting because it tells you a little bit about the trajectory of these types of narratives. So I'm going to read. There's 10 points that you can have. And if it's 0 to 3, you're probably not possessed. So she takes the quiz during multiple points in the book, and her score gets progressively worse. So she's like, oh, I am actually possessed. And you're like, yeah, obviously. So I'm going to try to pull that up because it actually tells you a lot about the genre. So are you possessed by a demon? If you answer yes to any of these questions, you get a point. 1, I hear strange noises in my home, especially at night, which family members tell me only occur when I am present. 2, I have new activities and pastimes that seem out of character, and I do things that I did not intend and do not understand. 3, I'm short and ill-tempered with my friends and loved ones. 4, I can understand languages I've never studied and have the ability to know things I couldn't know through ordinary means. So it's getting like progressively more, 5, I have blackouts not caused by drugs, alcohol, or a pre-existing health condition. 6, I have unusual new thoughts or hear voices. 7, I've had visions or dreams of personalities who may be demons. 8, a psychic, minister, or other spiritualist has told me I'm possessed. 9, I have urges to hurt or kill animals and other people. 10, I have hurt or killed animals or other people. So it gets progressively worse, and her like personal journey into possession follows all of these steps. And it does tie explicitly to actually in this case Jewish what is it called? Kabbalah. And so it ties back to the idea of like that Adam had a first wife, Lilith, and she was the mother of all demons. So it actually does go into sort of some religious dogma that was kind of interesting. But in the end, it is not a happy ending, as most of these books are. And I would really recommend it because it's a real quick read. But again, it's disturbing. Things just keep getting worse and worse, which is kind of what you're in for with this genre and horror in general. I don't honestly know why I am such a fan.
That
Not
sounded like a
uplifting.
Cosmo test.
Yeah, it was pretty, like the way it was presented in the book was great. That's exactly what it reminded me of. And she's like, well, because if you're 0 to 3, you're just a normal person. And she's like, yeah, I'm okay. But then it's like, yeah. So she does have blackouts and starts doing stuff that she doesn't know and has no control over. But that is kind of more classic representation of demonic possession. And I thought it was interesting to contrast it with the Clive Barker, which is just straight up like gore, and you take a bunch of tours through hell. So I really like both my books, but they're not for anybody who doesn't already like this genre. This is not a way into the genre to be like, yes, this is what I want to read now.
I like mine too, but I think I started reading The Shining when I was younger, and it scared me to death. So I was like, I don't like horror. But now I'm really into it. I enjoyed it. There's this part where I actually had to look it up again. This part where she says the sister that we think is possessed says, I sneak into your room when you're asleep, Mary Monkey. I've been doing it for weeks now, since the end of summer. You're so pretty when you're asleep. Last night I pinched your nose shut until you opened your little mouth. It was a good scare. I think it's what the child is doing this. It's even worse. I can see where Stephen King was like, what?
Yeah.
It was entertaining. It was a little ambiguous, so you wouldn't like it, Star. There's that element, like in a movie, because I do like scary movies. There's that element, like it does, like you said, Mallory, get progressively worse, and then it's like at the end, it's like, is it over? Is it? Oh,
Yeah, and that is actually like the twist that you find in these specific books is it actually over when it's over? And basically, who's gonna die? Is it the possessed person or a loved one? So there's never like a truly happy ending. So like I said, I don't know what this is not uplifting at all. But it's really good for spooky season. It's perfect for October.
Yeah.
how do you end on a positive note? Watch Lucifer.
Oh yeah, there you go. There you go. If you liked Sandman.
Right.
A lot of people don't
Ooh,
realize
yeah.
that Lucifer book series was based on the comics, which was a spin-off of the Sandman. My favorite. Yeah, for a little bit more of a lighthearted take on Satan.
And take that test. Maybe you too could be experiencing.
Are you possessed?
Maybe you too are possessed by the devil. That's fine.
Yes.
But I love my books. I had a lot of fun. And actually, in my search for these books, I found a couple of other books that I thought would be really interesting. This one is Ring Shout by J. Lee Clark, and in it, the Ku Klux Klan are actual demons, and the main character is a demon hunter. So this is my next read, and it's real short, so I will report in if it's good. And then Stephen Chbosky, who wrote Perks of Being a Wallflower, wrote a book about possession, which is crazy to me.
I read that
So,
one.
Was it good?
It was. It's very long. It's huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was good. It was
So-
good. It was different for him.
Yep, this is my spooky season book list for October.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us for our spooky October demon reads. And join us next month when we're going to read something kind of quite the opposite. We're going to delve into the world of mail order brides. So, see you then.
Does anybody hear those voices? Just me.
Wait, you're hearing voices?